Welcome, everyone. We're going to begin the presentation soon. We're just letting folks filter into the room here, so please stay on the line.
Well, welcome everyone to the State of 50 Plus Entrepreneur presented by AARP and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. We're so beyond excited today to hear from small business owners, policymakers, thought leaders, advocates, and experts on the impact of COVID-19 and how we can continue to build a more equitable economy for all. We're particularly excited to highlight some research that we've been conducting over the last few years. We know that many of you listening today are small business owners yourself, and we know that COVID has tested your business in new ways. As part of this research, we've interviewed several older small businesses to understand their perspectives better and to help us identify actionable solutions. Through these interviews, we've heard stories of heartache, of headache, small and large victories, frustration with the system that doesn't seem to work for everyone, especially minority and women-owned businesses. But through the pain of the last year, we've witnessed the resilient spirit of entrepreneurs and small business owners, and we hope that this event will begin to build momentum towards actionable change for older entrepreneurs and small business owners across the country. For those of you I haven't had the pleasure to meet yet, my name is Rhett Buttle. I am the founder and principal of Public-Private Strategies, and we've had the immense honor of partnering both with AARP and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York to host this event. If I may, I just wanted to do a few quick housekeeping items before we start the program today. First, we're not going to be able to take direct questions, but we're going to be monitoring the chat and the question queue, and our speakers who are going to be speaking today will also be looking at that. We're going to do our best to incorporate any questions and comments into the box, into our remarks, so that it feels natural and flowing. So feel free to please be active there in the chat. Introduce yourselves, let us know where you're joining us from, give us your name, the name of your organization or business. And we really encourage folks to share their story and relevant resources in the chat. We're going to make sure to share some resources at the end. We want to make sure that this is a collaborative experience for everyone who's joining us today. I also want to let everyone know that we're recording this event, and the recording will actually be available on the AARP Small Business Resource Center for the 50 Plus after this event. And so with that, let's go ahead and get started. We have so much to cover today. We have an amazing program and an amazing lineup of speakers. It's now my pleasure to introduce a dear friend, Susan Weinstock, who's the Vice President of Financial Resilience Program in AARP. Susan has been a fierce advocate for the 50 plus and over the last years, and always a fierce advocate for small business as well. And she spent the vast majority of her career actually working to improve the financial security of all Americans. Prior to joining AARP, Susan actually worked at the U.S. Department of Treasury as the Director of the Office of Consumer Policy, and we're so thrilled to have her to join us today to welcome us to this great event. With that, it's my pleasure to turn it over to you, Susan. Please take it away.
Thank you, Rhett, and thanks so much to you and your staff for putting this event together and for all of your help. I want to thank you so much to have everyone here joining us today for this very important conversation about older entrepreneurs. I first want to thank the New York Federal Reserve for working with us and sharing their in-depth research on this important population, especially Claire Kramer-Mills and Jessica Battisto. Later, we're going to hear personal stories from small business owners from around the country and how they have dealt with and coped throughout the pandemic. I want to thank Jeff Love in the AARP Research Department for overseeing our in-depth interviews with these and other older entrepreneurs. Hearing their personal stories is really so powerful. We're also going to join a conversation between Marketplace's Nancy Marshall-Genzer, AARP's Executive Vice President and Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer Nancy Lamond, and New York Federal Reserve President John Williams. And AARP's Senior Vice President of Thought Leadership, Gene Axius, will lead a panel discussion that will include the brand new Associate Administrator of the Office of Entrepreneurial Development at the Small Business Administration, Mark Madrid. We know that many of you joining us today are small business owners, and we understand how much dedication and effort you put into your businesses every day, requiring nearly constant care. You take calls during dinner, you interrupt your days off when something at the plant breaks or there's an alarm that goes off at your store. And if you have employees, I'm going to bet that you were up nights worrying about them and their welfare. And we certainly saw this year how many of you went without pay or had to work second jobs in an extraordinary effort to keep your businesses alive. We want you to know that we recognize that the survival of your businesses is very important. And it's important not just for you, for your employees, for your clients, and for your community, but also for the economy at large. It's so important for the health of our economy going forward. And that's why we're here. Now I'm going to turn this over to Felicia Brown, who leads AARP's work on entrepreneurship, to walk through the research findings. Welcome, Felicia.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Thank you. And thank you to the over 1,400 business owners and those who advocate for small businesses who are joining us today. Thank you, thank you, thank you. It is because of you we have realized an opportunity to listen, share, and learn not only about where we are today, but where we hope to go tomorrow and in the future. 2 years ago, AARP and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York set out to tell the story of small business owners, to really convey the state of the 50-plus entrepreneur, to emphasize the importance of small businesses to our communities, to those they employ, and to our economy, simply to express that small businesses matter. While we recognize that running a small business is difficult, we also recognize the resiliency and the strength of entrepreneurship, how you endure the highs and lows that tells a story of how you survive and thrive each and every day. So today we are here to tell the story of those who toil tirelessly for their families, their community, and how they help to improve our economy year after year, day after day. So now I'm turning it over to Claire to talk a little bit about the research that the Federal Reserve Board of New York launched. Claire?
Thank you, Felicia, and it's really a pleasure to be with you all today. This work is a natural fit for the Fed and AARP. The Fed is responsible for promoting conditions that create maximum employment and stable prices. Small businesses create jobs in our economy and in the communities where we live. AARP's mission is to empower people to choose how they live as they age. A key part of this is financial security. Self-employment can be a very important means to financial health for workers over age 50. Together, our partnership is aimed at highlighting the value of older entrepreneurs. And in the context of the pandemic, we want to help industry leaders, supporters, advocates, and others identify ways to support entrepreneurs and small business owners. So I'm going to walk through some of the research that we conducted over the last year. And we're thrilled today to share it with such a large and diverse group of business owners, industry leaders, and policymakers. The gathering here today and the interest in this webinar really highlights the importance of the issues we're discussing. So if we can cue up the next slide, the overwhelming majority of small business owners are age 45 plus. This is consistent across gender, race, and ethnicity. Given the importance of the 45 plus age group to our economy, we believe it's important to understand how COVID-19 has impacted them, how they've managed through such a tumultuous year, and what they need to build back stronger. So together, Felicia and I are going to share information reported directly from small business owners. We're drawing on two sources, the Fed's annual small business survey, as well as detailed interviews that the AARP research team conducted with 25 businesses in recent months. So this is information that is really recent, directly from small business owners. Now, as you can see in the next page, I'm going to present some graphs and charts taken from our survey information. COVID has significantly impacted the operating environment for all small businesses, resulting at the extreme in business closures. So this graph shows changes in the numbers of active business owners during 2020 and 2021. We break apart the business owners by race and ethnicity, represented by the different colored lines that you see on this graph. And on the left, you see January 2020, which is the baseline. Downward dips in the lines represent reductions in active or operating businesses. So you can see that business ownership declined for all groups, most dramatically in April 2020. It rebounded in the summer, though not to pre-pandemic levels, except for Latinx business owners, and then declined again through the end of 2020. At the beginning of 2021, the number of active business owners for all groups was still depressed. Most notably, Asian owners had declined by 19%, Black owners declined by 16%, Latinx business owners declined by 11%, and white owners dropped by 8%. On the next page, I'll show some additional information about businesses that are continuing to operate and where they are today. So for businesses that are still operating, like so many of you tuning in today, most tell us that they're in a weakened financial state. The chart on this page shows business sentiment captured in late 2020. Owners were asked about the financial condition of their business. The dark red bars represent a poor condition, or the worst category, followed by fair, or the second worst state, shown in light pink. First, looking at the top bar, you can see that 55% of owners overall said their firms were in poor or fair condition, followed by fair. Second, this finding is consistent across race and ethnicity of owners. It's a very consistent finding, but you also see that higher shares, 75% or more of Black and Asian business owners are expressing elevated concerns about the financial condition of their firms. On the next page, I'm going to show you a little bit more detailed information about the specific financial impact of the pandemic. The pandemic has taken a significant personal financial toll, which we're seeing in the survey responses. On this slide, you see several of the most common ways the crisis has hit business owners. Solid majorities did not draw a salary or reduce their salaries. Most used personal funds to pay outstanding business expenditures. And 1 in 4 is concerned about their personal credit score or loss of personal assets. This number jumps to 44% among Black business owners. Another number worth flagging is that approximately 1 in 5 business owners has borrowed against their home or retirement account to shore up their business and make it through the pandemic. Now, on the next page, we show information asked at the end of 2020 of business owners about their appetite, their need for additional government aid. And it's not surprising that solid majorities of business owners have expressed interest in applying for additional government assistance, as you see here. The recent extension of the Paycheck Protection Program to May 31st is an important piece of business aid. But the need for short-term funding is only one aspect of what we heard about how to build back stronger. Felicia is going to now share more insights from the in-depth interviews with small business owners. So Felicia, over to you.
Thank you, Claire. And so as Susan and I realized I wasn't on video. Thank you. So as Susan and Rhett indicated at the top of our event, AARP launched some interviews with several small employers. And we really set out to understand the motivations, challenges, and the strengths of 45 plus small business owners. But more importantly, we wanted to hear about their experiences amid COVID as it related to financing and surviving. And what we heard overall was, not to many of you all surprise, is access to funding was challenging. To their dismay, they secured less funding than they had anticipated. While many had banking relationships, checking and saving, when it came to accessing the PPP loan, they found it difficult to getting funding during this crisis. So as a result, some decided to change banks that would appreciate and value their business and understand the needs during this time of difficulty. And I want to draw your attention to some of the quotes here that we pulled from our research from our small business owners about the challenge of accessing credit, accessing funding, and really kind of what resulted as an impact to not being able to access that money. For small businesses who were fortunate enough to get PPP funding, they found the process really challenging, daunting, and really burdensome. However, as we all know, large firms benefited while the small guys either struggled or went out of business. And for some, the inability to get financing really could impact their ability to get more business and new business, which we know is critical to the success and sustainability of small businesses. Next slide, please. But in spite of all of this, we believe that there is a path forward. We believe that at the end of all of this, there's a rainbow and there's a silver lining to all of this. We believe that there will be access to relief to shore up and support small businesses. We believe that the field will be widening of more funding opportunities that results in more options to support the sustainability of small businesses. We believe, as the industry is showing us, the environment is showing us, that there will be more grants available for the creation of systems to ensure the success and mainstay of small businesses. We've seen recently, that you'll hear about later, that there's been some expanded small business administration resources that will shore up small businesses and ensure their success. Another area is there's a path forward to growing revenue. There has been more private and public entities who have entered the field have made commitments to helping small businesses grow their revenue. Some of the things that they've done is they've created funding opportunities. They've increased their capacity to excel through stronger ecosystems. And we'll talk more about that later in our two panels. More education on how to become a supplier to government and corporations, such as through education through the AARP Supply and Diversity Program. And expanded access to technological systems that will help them operate online and really access more funding. The third pillar of this, we believe there's a path forward to expanded networks. There will be more and more organizations as well as networks to helping to widen the field, particularly for businesses of color. Some that we know of are the local chambers of commerce. We have the Black Chamber of Commerce, we have the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, we have the Asian American Chamber of Commerce, who stand ready to help small businesses. We have the Small Business Administration. And we have national and local organizations that will provide wraparound services. And again, some of those will be represented on our thought leadership panel that you'll hear later today. And some who are really helping with shoring up is organizations that are helping to pair small businesses with experts, such as the NASDAQ Entrepreneurship Center, that is focused on mentoring and helping them to pair up with experts to help grow their business. And that is small businesses at any stage of their growth. Next slide, please. So it is not by surprise that AARP is committed. We are committed to helping small businesses. We, along with Public-Private Strategies, just recently launched the Small Business Resource Center for the 50 plus, which can be found at www.smallbizrc.org, where there you will find tools, tips, and resources to help you along your business journey. You will hear there interviews from small business owners who share their stories through our newest segment, Meet the Founders. Next slide. And so we really want to hear your story. For those of you who are small business owners with us today, we want to capture those stories. And because of you, our work matters, you matter. We know there have been tough times. We know that small business owners rise above. It's really that entrepreneurial spirit. We encourage you to share your story at hashtag 50plussmallbiz and to tell your story as you continue to rise, pivot, and swivel during these difficult times. Am I passing it over to you, Claire, or passing it over to Rhett?
You're passing to Rhett.
Okay, thank you. And Rhett, take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much to both of you for that amazing overview of the research. Also some resources. I just want to encourage folks and everyone who's on the line today to take advantage of the research. I'm also inspired by the amount of just chat going on in the chat. And so I want to encourage folks to continue to make sure that you're sharing your stories in the chat. Feel free to share resources. We're taking that all in. A few folks have asked whether the slides will be available. We'll definitely make the slides available. We'll also try to make what we can of the chat available for certain folks. And again, this conversation is streaming both on the Public-Private Strategies Facebook page, reshared on the Federal Reserve of New York page, so folks can access it there as well. And we'll make sure when you registered, I think we got folks' email, so we'll make sure to follow up with folks. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and move forward in the program. It is now my pleasure to go ahead and turn the conversation over to Nancy Marshall-Genzer, who is an amazing senior reporter at Marketplace and covers several economic issues, has long covered the Fed, and we are so thrilled to be able to have her today for this enlightening conversation. So with that, Nancy, it is my pleasure to turn the conversation over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Rhett. And I would like to introduce John Williams, who just popped on. Hello, John. He is, of course, President and CEO of the New York Federal Reserve Bank, also Nancy Lamond. And Nancy is Executive Vice President and Chief Advocacy and Engagement Officer for AARP. And I'm going to break our conversation into three different topics. So the first topic is going to be the state of small businesses post-COVID-19 and also the Federal Reserve's response. So John, the first question is actually for you. Why is the Federal Reserve interested in small businesses and their fate?
Well, I think it's, because of small businesses are a big part of the economy. And obviously the Federal Reserve, we have responsibility for a couple of important goals. One is maximum employment and price stability. And when you think about a really economy that's achieving this maximum employment goal, you're thinking about an economy that's truly reaching its potential. And small businesses are a big part of, job creators, big part of the economy. And so it's critical for us to understand what's happening among small and I would say medium and larger businesses as well, and understand how the economy looks going forward and how our policies and actions are helping achieve this goal of maximum employment. So that's, I think, the big picture reason we're very focused on that.
Yeah, we're going to dive deeper into that a little bit later, John. But Nancy, first I want to ask you, why is the AARP interested in small businesses?
Well, and first off, thanks to everyone for sponsoring this today. Nancy, thanks for being here. Well, we get this question a lot because people hear AARP and they immediately think retired. But the fact of the matter is at least a third of AARP's 38 million members are working. And they're working in some cases because they want to stay engaged and connected, and many because they need to earn a living. to continue to make ends meet. And in fact, there may be even more than a third of our members who are working. Many people who might say they're retired are going back part-time. The largest growing segment before COVID with Airbnb were women over the age of 55. And so the picture of older people in the workforce is very different, I think, than some we've thought about. The second thing we know is that with America aging, and with people having fewer retirement or less retirement savings than years ago, we know that more and more older people are going to be in the workforce. We did focus groups years ago because everybody hated the word retirement. And so after all these focus groups, I joked that we came up with a new name for retirement, and it was called work. And that has, unfortunately for many people, come to be true. Second reason we're interested in it is we want to kind of bust that notion that entrepreneurs are only in their 20s and only in the tech world. The reality is 4 out of 5 small business owners are 45 plus, and they are among the most successful in the entrepreneurial space. They come to it after years of experience. They have many contacts. They've had the benefit of failure and resilience, and they want to bring those skills, including some of the softer skills. So we find that there's a lot of interest in becoming an entrepreneur later in life. And yes, indeed, we joke you don't have to wear blue jeans and a black T-shirt and operate out of a garage in order to do this work. People of all ages. And then the third reason is we really wanted to partner with the New York Fed on this research. Such a respected organization. Claire went through the data. John will talk more about it here. And I think what's important is we've all been engaged in the last months in all this speculation of what effect has COVID had on any number of things. And what we're beginning to see with the Fed research, with some of our conversations, is unpacking that and not just kind of speculating about what all the results have been, but having some real data and real insights. This, of course, will be vital as we move to the post-COVID period and work to rebuild the economy and various systems that we have in place.
Yeah, and we are going to unpack some of the data from the studies that were released in conjunction with this. But first, John, I want to ask you about what actions the Fed has taken to help small businesses survive this pandemic.
Well, I think one of the things that's clear to I think everybody who's on this call is that small businesses, of course, are swept up in the pandemic, being affected directly and indirectly by the health crisis. And this is first and foremost a health crisis that's having these effects on the economy. And we can never lose sight of that until we get past the health crisis and broad-based vaccination and through this, the economy can't really get back to full strength. In terms of what the Fed can do, we aren't not health experts or health policy, but we can support the economy. And I think the first and foremost thing was to make sure that credit is flowing in the economy. Back in March of last year, it seems like a long time ago, there was, we were in the middle of a panic and a crisis globally. And the Fed, my colleagues, and we all got together and worked our utmost to make sure that the situation didn't get worse, that financial markets were, continue to function well and credit would be able to flow because we don't want a financial or a panic to add to the challenges that we already had. So we were really very early engaged to basically triage the financial system, making sure it's still operating. And then we turned immediately to making sure that credit is flowing to households and small and medium-sized businesses. We did a lot of programs to make sure supporting the PPP program in our liquidity facility that basically was to facilitate the use of that program. We did the Main Street lending program, and we did a lot of efforts, including monetary policy, to help the economy add more jobs and have a strong recovery once the pandemic was under under control and we can move forward. I mean, I think the important thing was what did we do immediately, but also what are we doing today and going forward to make sure that we have a full and robust recovery in the economy, which of course will benefit households and small, medium, and other businesses throughout the country.
And Nancy, what has the AARP done to help small businesses? Are there particular programs that you think have worked really well?
Well, we've worked with small businesses for a number of years. Several years ago, Small Business Administration came to us because for all the resources they offered, they were finding it difficult to get to our constituency. And so we built in mechanisms so that they could reach our members. And since then, we've done a steady series of education programs, webinars, and most recently, I think Felicia mentioned it, created a small business resource center, which I know you had the .org for earlier, and have been able to provide those kinds of resources to small business owners. We also try very hard to keep in close touch so that we understand well the climate of the small business community. We are a large advocacy organization working at not only the federal level, but in every state and in many municipalities across the country. And as we and others advocate on important issues like sick leave, like paid leave, like pensions, we think it's really, really important that we take into account the very serious concerns small business owners have as they try to provide benefits, but also have to do it with perhaps a little less running room than some large corporations.
You know, Nancy, do you mind if I add to that?
I do not mind. Jump right in.
So one thing that, I think in this partnership that Nancy referred to, one of the things that we also are doing beyond our policy actions is doing this research and data analytics that we share with, everybody to really try to understand where the challenges are, most acute, which parts of the economy are faring better. And clearly this report is part of that, but it's part of a broader effort to make sure that this information is available, people can use it effectively to address the issues and have the facts. And we are, a very nonpartisan, non-political organization, so we're just trying to bring the best information, the most timely information to help inform, the work of our partners and others throughout the country working on these important issues.
And John, I want to stay with you. Of course, one of the things the Fed does is set interest rates, and interest rates have been near zero. You touched on this a little bit, but can you talk a little bit more about how the low interest rates, translate into the real economy? How do they help small businesses, say your local restaurant or your local barbershop?
Well, there are, two ways. And first of all, you go back to this issue that during the pandemic, it's, low interest rates aren't going to reopen restaurants or deal with the coronavirus directly. But as, we're getting hopefully past that, I think our monetary policies help businesses and the economy in a couple of ways. One is clearly lower interest rates make it easier to finance borrowing that businesses and others do. Definitely, we've seen very low and record low mortgage rates, loan rates for businesses and others, and that makes it easier to make those payments or to buy a car or to buy a house, and that adds to jobs in the economy. And again, there's this broader feedback loop of strong financial conditions, a healthy financial system and availability of credit that then gets people both back to work, and then they're back willing and able to go back into restaurants or travel and do other activities that of course directly affect the small businesses. So when we think about this as a very much a positive feedback loop of lower interest rates or strong financial conditions, helping households and businesses spend and borrow as they see fit, and then of course that adds jobs that then feeds back into a stronger economy and helps the recovery be as strong as possible.
And I'm just seeing on the chat, one entrepreneur was saying lower interest rates mean tons to me. So clearly that is a huge issue. Nancy, as you've been watching how the pandemic is affecting small businesses, what has surprised you? What has stood out to you?
Well, one thing that I've been very struck by, and not just with small businesses, but in the broad portfolio of how people are trying to deal during COVID, is we've kind of always known it intellectually, but you cannot thrive in America right now if you are not able to work on computers and apps. And I have been very struck by that in my day job work right now, which is in trying to provide information on how you get a vaccine in this country. And almost every system is built to be online. Very few 1-800 numbers, very few mobile vans for people caught in their homes. And I was struck, and so I've been struck by it across a number of areas, and especially in the interviews we did with entrepreneurs. And the entrepreneurs who seemed, it really struck me, to have struggled the most were those who said they were not as technology proficient at the beginning of COVID as they could have been, should have been, and that they needed to develop those skills and have the resources to develop those skills moving forward. I was reminded right before the pandemic, I had spent a little time with my cousin and his wife, who are entrepreneurs. They have a small business, clothing business in Durham, North Carolina. And they had mentioned to me that they were going to try to open another one down the road in Raleigh. And they hadn't done it. And my cousin said to me, Nancy, we decided instead to do an online store, to have an online presence. And he said to me, that's just like building another store. People don't think of it. They say, oh, we'll have a website. And that really stuck with me as I read through the interviews that we did. And so I think coming out of this, I think for SBA and other organizations, we all need to think a little bit about how we work even more on kind of digital competency, even beyond digital literacy, kind of competency and ability to operate in that space.
Huh. And John, when you think about small businesses coming back from the pandemic, what are some of the challenges you think that they're going to face when they try to reopen or make up money that they've lost?
Well, I think, first of all, I'm optimistic about the overall economy. I do think we're making, great strides on the vaccination programs. We've seen enormous fiscal support from the federal government to households, to businesses, and to state and local government. So I think we have a lot of positives going forward. So this will be, over the next year or two, will be a great opportunity for small businesses to see customers coming back safely and into their businesses, and a strong economic recovery. So I think that is the good foundation for a lot of business owners who've clearly struggled and met with a lot of challenges over the past year and plus now. But so I think that there's a positive going forward. I think, I'm going to go to what Nancy said. She told some stories, and I'm hearing exactly the same stories when I talk to small business owners, and really about having to rethink their business models. And I talked to one restaurateur who said in over 30 years their restaurant had never done deliveries or online orders. Now they have to, and that's their new part of their business model. Another startup small business owner talking about exactly, Nancy, as you said, setting up an online presence along with the brick and mortar presence. So I think a lot of small businesses who have kind of been very agile and been able to make those shifts are going to be well positioned in this new hybrid world that we're going to be in, where I think people will be coming back into the city center, into the offices, but maybe a lot more remote work. So I think being able to navigate that will be really important. And I think for those who have trouble kind of coming up with a new model, I think that's going to be a little bit more challenging, because I think the new normal, for a lot of people going into work is going to be different. It's hard to know what that looks like. But if you own a restaurant or other things that are around workplaces, I think you're going to need to adjust that. I do see something very positive. You asked Nancy the big surprise, and Obviously, there's been a lot of, challenges and difficulties for small businesses. Absolutely, and we've seen that in the work we've done and the reports and in the discussions you were having earlier. But we've also seen an enormous number of new small businesses being started. So there is an entrepreneurial spirit. There are people out there who are looking for that next stage in life or next challenge, and we're seeing them taking those opportunities. And again, I think combined with a better economic outlook, I think there are some pretty positive trends there. That the willingness and ability of people to take those risks and start a new business is clearly as alive today as it ever was.
Yeah, actually, Nancy, I wanted to ask you, what do you think about the prospects for new small businesses starting?
I think there are, to John's point, I think many more older folks are going to look to the opportunity for small business. Some of that is, we've all had a chance to have the world disrupted and think about what we might want to do. And so there's an element of that. And then the reality is we know that at the height of the pandemic, unemployment for people over the age of 55 was around 11%. And that compares to the Great Recession a few years ago of 7.6%. And so we also know that if you're older and you lose your job, it typically takes a lot longer for you to get a job than someone else. So we know there are a lot of older folks who've been out of the labor market for a while. They are probably thinking about what to do if they can't get back into their industry or their job, and that this is going to be a real opportunity for them. And I think for all of us who do programs, and people in the chat were nice to mention a couple of AARP programs they've been to, we've done partnerships with local NAACPs, with economic development authorities, and I think there'll be even more demand for those moving forward. And we and others will need to rise to the occasion because there is no doubt that getting back into previous jobs for a host of reasons may be very tough.
Yeah, and actually the next thing I want to talk about is the personal financial toll on small business owners from the pandemic. We know that a majority of small business owners didn't draw a salary last year, and a near majority of owners across all races and ethnicities reported they had to dip into their personal money to keep their businesses going. So John, considering that, what do you think are some solutions or tools the Fed could use to help give these small businesses a bridge to the other side of the pandemic?
Well, I'm going to start, I'm not deflecting, but I do think that it's not just about the Fed and it's not just about any one group. It's really about all the different pieces coming together. So I think the federal fiscal support, along with programs by state and local governments around the country, are really critically important. For a lot of small businesses, what they need are grants to bridge them through this period. So I know that some people commented on this. I can't read all the chats, there's so many, but that taking on greater debt right now is not really what they need. They really need to fill the missing revenues that they've lost due to the pandemic. And PPP and other programs were designed really to do more of that. While the Fed, we can't do that. We can't provide grants or transfers. We can only lend money. So we have a part to play in our roles in terms of making sure that the economy is strong. Because again, I think that from my perspective, a really strong economy will help small businesses and others. The faster we can get back to a strong economy, the better it is for them. And obviously, there's a lot of important work that needs to be done, by all parts of our society and our economy to come together. But I do think that the federal support that's come through over the past year, starting with the CARES Act or even earlier and all the way through today, do provide important bridges for households and for businesses and for the economy. It's still a very, very it's the most challenging circumstances, our economy's faced in our lifetimes, hopefully. And this is, I'm not trying to understate that, but I think that fiscal support is going to be an important part of the bridge to move forward. And again, my focus is on really making sure that as we move forward, that we're setting the stage for a really robust, strong economic full recovery.
And of course, fiscal support being what Congress does, not what the Fed does.
Yes, and just to be clear, we can't tax, we can't spend. That's for the elected officials.
Yeah, absolutely. Nancy, considering what John just said, what programs do you think have been the most effective so far, and what do you think are the most promising to help small businesses?
Well, and one thing I wanted to mention as we look ahead, I wanted to talk about how important I think the Fed research is in shining a light on the disparities as well. The very significant challenges of small business owners who are Black, Asian, Hispanic. And I think that's hugely important as we look ahead at any number of solutions. Well, my sense is I'm not much of a student on the impact of some of the steps that have been taken, because I think we need to kind of take a step back and look at them. But there is no doubt that the direct support has been valuable. Again, coming out of COVID, I think one of the things lots of groups will need to look at is how well are we all equipped in a couple of areas. One is the federal government delivering different kinds of things. So delivering a stimulus check is different than delivering a loan, which requires a lot of paperwork and a lot of process, where I think it was quite uneven. And we don't want to miss the opportunity at the end to go back and think about how these systems need to be improved. Hopefully we'll never have another time like this, but we certainly will have examples of federal grant programs and others. And how can we be sure that we've improved them so that small businesses and others can do better? And we look forward ahead to different kinds of programs that will come out of SBA. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of proposals in the Congress that we and others will need to engage in.
Yeah, can I add to that? Completely
Absolutely.
agree. Nancy's making a really important set of points on that. And I think one of the big lessons, especially early on with PPP, is for a lot of small businesses, especially Black-owned businesses and Hispanic-owned businesses, we saw that they didn't have relationships with banks, and also that applies to a lot of very small businesses more generally. And when you don't have a relationship with a financial institution, then you often put to the end of the queue, or even understanding how to navigate a really complex process, which was rolled out very quickly, was really challenging. And a lot of, and we heard this directly from business owners, but we also see it in the data that a lot of small businesses weren't able to take advantage of those programs initially. So I think to Nancy's point, thinking to the future of how do you create an ecosystem, an environment where the small businesses are well positioned, that if we do have a situation where, a program like this is implemented, that money is quickly and effectively getting to those that qualify for that. And I think that that's an area, whether it's in developing better relationships with financial institutions, or also thinking much more about a new type of program design. I think those are really important lessons from the past year.
And Nancy, I want to ask you a little bit about the American Rescue Plan. Of course, that's the most recent pandemic relief bill that President Biden signed into law earlier this month. What do you think the impact of the American Rescue Plan will be on small businesses?
Well, I have to confess, I don't really know an awful lot about some of the provisions. I'll leave that to speakers later in the program. I do think that it is going to offer a lot of individuals immediate relief with the direct stimulus paychecks, whether you're a small business person or other, and that's going to be important. And from our point of view, provides a lot of very important benefits for for older Americans. And I think the next package will be quite interesting to watch. If indeed the focus is on infrastructure and is on rebuilding in a literal sense and on broadband, kind of what implications it might have for small businesses. And I am quite sure there'll be kind of heady engagement on that as we move ahead.
Absolutely. Interesting to see.
Yeah, one thing we've done quite a bit of research around how, and other economists have too as well, on how the stimulus checks and the unemployment insurance have been used over the past year. And what you see very clearly is when that funding was available, people went out and spent it, a portion of it, and for lower income households, they spent a significant share of it, and that really goes directly into expenditures into services and stores in the economy. So we saw a direct, not only correlation, I would say causation here, of the stimulus checks and unemployment, extended unemployment benefits going right back into the economy. And when we saw that get cut back late last year, we saw the dip in consumer spending. There were a lot of things happening, but then back in January, I think we saw again more money become available and people were spending that. So even the money that doesn't go directly to businesses, the one that's going to families, they're going and taking that money, they're taking it into their local businesses and buying things and going into the restaurants or whatever, and that does feed right back into the economy. So you really do see a very strong positive flow from those policies in the past, and I expect that to continue going forward.
We shall see. For the last part of our discussion, I want to talk about some research that Felicia Brown was mentioning earlier, and showing these stark differences in access to credit for businesses owned by people of color. They face more rejection for PPP loans, and overall their ability to get a loan. Financing options, there are private and public financing options available for them, to try to get them to the other side of this recession. But John, I want to ask you, what do you think the long-term impact of these financing disparities will be for these firms and for their households?
Well, I think this is an important issue that we need to make sure that as we think about the economic recovery and economic growth after the pandemic, as you started this conversation, that we make sure that this is truly an equitable recovery, and one of the things we've seen, and it wasn't a surprise, unfortunately, was that the lack of an equitable economy, the fact that there are parts of our communities that don't have access to the same type of access to financial services, to health services, and other parts of our economy, clearly became evident when the pandemic hit, and with the disparate effects in terms of health outcomes and the experiences of minority-owned businesses and everything that we've been talking about. So I think that looking forward, it's a really important goal is to make sure that we have a financial system that is serving all segments of society, that is helping all businesses of all types succeed. And obviously we have an important part in that in the Fed, in that we make sure that the fair lending laws that prohibit discrimination in lending are followed, and the Community Reinvestment Act is followed, and those responsibilities we take very seriously. But more broadly, I think one of the big challenges that we must meet is making sure that as we build this economy for the future, coming out of the pandemic, that it is a more equitable economy, that's one that serves all segments of society.
Nancy, what do you think the long-term effect will be of that inability to get financing for firms run by people of color?
Well, long-term and perhaps short-term is a tremendous economic effect on those individuals. And as we look at people who are 45 and 50 who've had a very rough patch here, we worry a lot. I mean, 50% of people over the age of 65 are living only basically on their Social Security check. and maybe a little bit of savings. So we worry that that group is growing as a result of this. But I would also kind of reinforce John's look to the future. I think I don't know what group brings them together, whether it's the Small Business Administration or some other set of people, the Fed or others. But I do think it's an opportunity to bring together financial institutions and talk about this in a systemic way. I mean, this clearly was not just a failure of one institution down the street from me or you. This was far-reaching, and what steps need to be taken moving ahead. And I think maybe we've just identified Rhett's next program. And because I know there'll be some discussion of it later today, but a real opportunity to make it a more equitable playing field.
John, do you want to add anything to that? You were nodding your head.
Well, I was not in agreement with Nancy, so I think, but I do think this is a place where we at the Fed do play an important role. We are a convener because it's, really when you think about these kind of issues, it's not about just one group or another group or agency doing this. It's about everybody coming together, and we, given our responsibilities and our focus on really having healthy, strong communities and an economy, one of our important activities is to convene, whether it's banks, whether it's businesses, whether it's nonprofits, or everybody bringing together the best thinking, the best ideas, and help tackle these really important issues. So that's our commitment, is to continue to engage in that convening, connecting, and catalyzing the changes that need to happen.
Nancy, I want to go back to you and ask about another disparity. Larger firms were able to get PPP loans more easily. They were able to invest in capital expenditures and recover more quickly from the pandemic. So what are the implications of that on the smaller firms and their ability to survive and stay competitive?
Yeah, we saw that all the time, and we heard that in our interviews. And again, how do we get to a place where small businesses who don't have the resources of larger entities and large departments and staff can get the kind of expertise to be able to move quickly through a loan process and others? And these are all, your questions are very good, and really the agenda for the future. And I think we all are sitting in our respective organizations now, reflecting on what we've learned over the last year, 13 months, and hoping that we will find the right way to not just shine a light on the challenges, but also address them. And you've identified a number of them today. And we have a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of commitment across all sectors to make each piece of the world a little better.
Yeah, and John, of course, another thing the Fed does is regulate the nation's biggest banks. I mean, how can the Fed help to promote fair lending and ensure that businesses owned by older people of color have access to credit?
Well, as I agree that we do have a really important role to play in that, in making sure that we are holding the banks that we supervise accountable on the fair lending laws, and more generally on providing investing in the communities that they serve through the Community Reinvestment Act. So those are really important responsibilities, and we're very committed to carrying those out. So but I do think that there is this broader issue that we also need to address, which is a lot of very small businesses, and I understand the reasons why. As you go peeking at the chat, haven't used banks that much, or have meet a lot of different types of challenges. And I think part of the solution, as Nancy was suggesting, is really getting thinking about either new ideas or bringing people together to address making sure that businesses have access to credit that's appropriate, that and that processes that we have are really serving the businesses and the communities. Because as we learned from the pandemic, is very challenging to get the money out to under the PPP program, but also others. Given the kind of the way the world was, and a lot of smaller institutions did get left out for a time.
Yeah, we'll have to watch how the American Rescue Plan works and how that gets money out to folks and the effect of that. But we are going to wrap up and send it back to Rhett.
Wonderful. Well, I just want to give a huge thank you first, Nancy Marshall-Genzer, for taking the time to help spotlight what is this critical issue, and both Nancy Lamond and John Williams for what your institutions are doing. I think, what we heard in the conversation today was small businesses are the backbones of our communities and economy. I think we're all agreed on that. But it sounds like we need to reimagine our thinking and maybe some of our systems and maybe COVID presents an opportunity to do some of that. And I know both of your institutions are committed to that, and we look forward to working with you. So with that, we are going to thank you for your time, and we're going to transition into the next panel. I am inspired by everything we're seeing in the chat from small business leaders and small business owners. We just have a ton of folks sharing resources. We're seeing live trusted guidance and technical assistance happening in this moment. Now I'm really excited to turn the conversation over for an amazing panel of entrepreneurs who are doing this every day to hear about what their experience is as they think about the 50+ entrepreneurship journey and their perspective during this critical time. So it's my pleasure to turn the conversation to Felicia Brown, who's really been an anchor and the spirit behind this project and driving us all to do better to moderate this panel. So with that, over to you, Felicia.
Thank you, Rhett, and thank you for that enriching conversation that we just had with John and Nancy. So thank you again for that. So I'm excited. I'm excited for this next panel, which really brings together some amazing entrepreneurs and small business owners. Two of our business owners actually participated in the interviews that I highlighted and mentioned earlier today that was launched by AARP. So we asked them to join us today to really share their perspective from what's happening on the ground and really some thoughts on systemic issues or challenges they've witnessed over the years, and really more recently as we've been involved in this pandemic. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our next panel. First, I have Jaime Fuentes. He is the CEO of Jaime, I'm getting this mixed up, Fuentes Insurance Agency, Inc., located in Livingston, California. He was born in Mexico and immigrated to the United States in 1980 at the age of 14. He is a 2016 alumni of the Stanford Latino Entrepreneur Leaders Program. And next I have Jan E. Lowe. She is the managing partner of Sayte Thai Bistro and Bar in Las Vegas, Nevada. For 12 years, she held strategic and senior level positions in human resources with Fortune 500 companies. With a passion to take the entrepreneur plunge, she opened her restaurant in 2005. She's a committed advocate for restaurateurs and women-owned and minority-owned businesses. Third, I have Kim Hunter. He is the CEO of Land Grant Communications. He's a key influencer in the communications industry. Provoke recognized Hunter as an individual achievement for Sabre, Superior Achievement in Branding, Reputation, and Engagement. He received that award and was named him as one of the Intu's Innovator 25. Kim has received other distinguished awards in public relations, and most recently, PR Week's the 50 Most Powerful People in PR Awards from 2012 to 2020. And last, we have Tawanda Livingston. She's the Chief Business Strategist at Livingston Works. Tawanda Livingston is a successful and award-winning equity, diversity, and inclusion executive with almost 30 years of strategic and tactical experience. She's an innovative thought, equity, inclusion, and supplier diversity leader in this era, Prior to launching her business, she delivered transformational solutions for corporate and government agencies with the inclusion and supplier diversity space. So as you can see, who we have with us today, we're going to have a very enriching conversation. So let's really dive in. So, we can't say enough about how Black and Brown businesses were hit, especially hard during this pandemic. And Tawanda, I'd like to start with you. As a small business owner, talk to us about the implication of the intersection between the pandemic and the social justice movement. Tawanda?
Thank you, Felicia. That's a loaded question. And I have to say that what the pandemic and the social and civil crisis we experience in America revealed to me was that we are all in the same storm, but we're not all in the same boat. However, I do believe that if we tether our boats together, we can get to safe harbor so we can all eat well, live well, and play well. Now, there are brighter minds that are studying whether or not the tragedy with George Floyd and the intersection of the pandemic, if they happened at different times, would it have been differently? Again, brighter minds. However, the pandemic did reveal to us fissures in our legal system, our political system, our educational system, and our health system, and dare I say, our economic system. And what happened was that the fissures then imploded and exploded all at the same time across our nation, really exposing how small businesses, the most fragile of small businesses, the most underserved, the ones that serve our communities on the peripheral, have been impacted. And let me just tell you, these issues that small business face, they were faced before COVID and the social and civil unrest, and they just became magnified now that we're in this crisis. And it was all the perfect storm for us. And what I would say, because those systems became laid bare, they were laid raw. We saw how all of these systems that were supposed to save us actually imprisoned us. And when they shut down, it impacted us in such a way that economically devastated business. We saw businesses close. We saw people lose their jobs. We saw bodegas that we needed in our communities, where there are food deserts that were serving a population, providing nutrition to that area, closed down. And what happened is that even though those things were going on, we saw a crushing of what make America great, the crushing of America's hope. See, what people became fed up with the pandemic and George Floyd and the civil and social unrest, it became so overwhelming, the weight, it began to crush us. And people start to do outcry related to it because of the crushing of what make America great, and that is our hope, the hope that's in America. And those individual businesses that have been stigmatized, marginalized, and dare I say rationalized out of our economy began to speak up and begin to show up and say, hey, we are your major employers. And we showed the world that we are the major employers. So what I would end with saying that the intersection of the social and civil unrest and the pandemic, it crushed us, but it did not crush the entrepreneurial spirit that makes America great. And that is that small businesses, believe it or not, showed up in force. Some of us did close, but we did rally around what was important, and that is to save our communities, to save our nation, and save jobs. And we did that collectively together. But I don't want to undermine that the exposure of what the pandemic and social and civil unrest did was show that the systems, the laws, the programs that were put into place to help small businesses, because they work in vacuums and silos, were not connected enough. did not connect culturally to the communities that it needed to really elevate and hold up during this time. It exposed an economic ladder that is unjust, unfair, and was not designed for brown and Black and women people to thrive or climb. So that's what I would end with, in saying that the spirit of us is still there, because we, believe it or not, entrepreneurs, we were built for a time such as this. And so some of us are going to emerge, but I would ask that we emerge together, because what the pandemic showed us is that we are mutually dependent on one another to thrive. And that's what we're all here to do, is thrive.
Absolutely. Any thoughts from our other panelists about how this intersected and created where we are today?
Well, I have a flip side to that, and that is there has been some positive outcomes of a pandemic. And I'm probably a beneficiary of that because I specialize in crisis management and I have a background in healthcare. And I will tell you, 2020 was the best year of my 30 years running my agency.
Okay.
On the eve of my 30th anniversary, I closed the largest piece of business in the history of the firm. What was it? It was a COVID-19 educating the African-American community in the state of California, as well as encouraging African-Americans to get vaccinated. So while that was a tragedy on one end, I was a beneficiary of a success of a pandemic. So while there is always some doom and gloom, my philosophy has always been, and it has been for the 30 years I've been running my first business, is that always be prepared for the worst outcome. And I think one of the things I always tell small businesses today, yesterday, and in the future is that you've got to save money for that rainy day. You have got to put a strategy in place that is not going to be short term, but also long term.
Yeah. So Jan E, so what do we say, to Kim's point about the fact that, some of the small businesses really were not in a position. You all, this panel here, have years of experience. You know what to do and how to do it and how to put money away for the rainy day. But, you think about some of these businesses that were valuable to our community, but just were not in a position to thrive. What do you say to that?
It's very good question, Felicia. As entrepreneurs, we're so used to doing things on our own, right? Especially for the Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, it is truly not our culture to help, to ask for help. So when we open up businesses, we're like, you know what? That's my passion. I love to cook. I love to do this. So I'm going to open it up, right? So we don't really empower ourselves, and I'm guilty too. I'll be very honest, right? Is that networking, the importance of looking into networking, the information, the resources, everything's out there. And I'll be the first to thank the SBA, so grateful, and our government. Yes, I know a lot of time business owners like, government, leave us alone, let us do our job, right? But this time when true crisis came in, the first round of PPP, I'll tell you, Felicia, it was a nightmare. Remember a year ago, everyone, that everyone's not, we don't know what's happening with COVID, but moreover, everybody's out there running to get toilet papers. I mean, my God, right? So as business owners, I always say that, just treat this analogy as a toilet paper. If one store, one PP, one lender is not giving you that lending, guess what? Go to another bank, go to another resource, right? Just like toilet paper. We don't just sit there and wait for them to restock the next week, right? So we got to take our own entrepreneurship spirit and go find the resources and go get the help. So because I'll tell you, a lot of resources are out there.
Yeah. And
I'm sorry, Felicia?
No, I would echo that. I think that many small business owners actually pivoted when they realized that they weren't going to receive that PPP lending. So
yes, and I do, and I see on the chat a lot of questions about EIDL loans. I'm not, interest rates, all that stuff, and I encourage all of you to please take a look at it, because I know the round 2 PPP has been extended to end of May. So, and if you don't know, please contact me. I will give you my personal contact. You can contact me. Let's get the money to you.
See, that's what we're here for. So I'm going to pivot a little bit. Jaime, Tell us a little bit about how your years of experience really kind of better equipped you to navigate the small business space, and what has been some of the strengths that come from that experience, but also has conversely continues to surprise you?
Well, thank you for having me. There's a lot of questions too, but I'll try to tack it. All these years in business and coming from another country, it's not an excuse for me not to try, not to get into a business or give it all my all. But honestly, my worst thing was time management. I learned time management as I went on my business, because at the beginning, when I started the business, I didn't want appointments. I didn't want a to-do list because I felt like they were controlling my time. And I wanted to go fishing whenever I wanted to go fishing. Or whenever I go play golf, I wanted to be available for my personal stuff. But guess what? I don't even know how to play golf. So that was a good excuse for me to get out of the office. But now with those years of experience, now I use my time very productive. I plan, I love to-do lists, and I love appointments. So if you don't control that time and make it as productive as possible, you leave a lot of opportunities on the table. The other thing is execution. I used to plan so many plans and so many things, but never executed, and most of them. So I spent energy and time and money, and that was just wasted. Now I plan something and I finish it, regardless of the outcome. If I give it my all, I feel I did good, But also, I need to ask for help. I wasn't asking for help. There's help out there.
Right.
The other thing is acceptation, Accept the situation where we are. I'm not saying resignation. I'm not saying stay home and cry, accept that you lost. No, get up in the morning, show up to your office and see what's available. And like they were saying, yeah, he got his best deal during this pandemic. We don't want anything bad to happen on people, of course, we don't. But there is opportunities, regardless of what's going on the economy. You have to get up and use your resources, what's at hand. A lot of times I got a tunnel vision, and there's resources next to me that I don't see. The other thing is real quick is you said navigating. I learned how to file a flight plan. I just thought about that the other day. A pilot, when it takes out on the air, they have to file a flight plan. What is the most important thing on a flight plan? Destination. What other information is there on the flight plan? Terrain, weather. Is there an alternate route? Is there an airport next to me if I have an emergency? PPP, SBA. So it's like a business on the air. So you said navigating, so you got me there. But we just have to get up in the morning, ask for help.
So, Jaime, I think what you are echoing is what we indicated at the top of our event here, that entrepreneurs are resilient, and a no is not always a no, and so there's an opportunity to turn the no into yes, and really looking at different ways to stay afloat. But we know that even in this pandemic, many of our small businesses were unable to survive what they perhaps thought they could, because this pandemic was something that we never have seen before. And so, Tawanda, I asked, what, as an older entrepreneur, and having many years of experience doing this, being as a small business owner, what have you gleaned in terms of your resilience, really quickly?
What I would state that from my standpoint and my vantage point is that in order to thrive, you of course need wisdom that comes with age. So I'm not saying older, but age. I'm not going to claim older. But you also need to, one, be able to ask for help and seek help intentionally, and to also identify a mentor, sponsor, ambassador, someone to push and pull you to that next level, and then help you to strategize about the next. What is your next? You always should have a next. And looking at an environmental influences to see how they may impact that next. So that's what I would state, that the people who are winning are the people who are able to say, no, I'm not going to accept no, I'm not going down without a fight. I'm going to fight. Yeah, I'm going to slow down, but I'm not going to shut down, because it's never okay to check out. And that's what we want small businesses to know, that if you're out of business, collaborate with someone else. Collaboration is key. Getting a mentor is key. And then also shed your ego and ask for help. Step out of that box and really go for what you started with this dream, and you'll achieve it.
Great. Good advice. So, in our conversations with small business owners, many of them indicated that they were denied, or it was very challenging, difficult to access funding, even with a solid banking relationship. And, we talked about that earlier. So Jeannie, talk to us a little bit about some of your personal experience with financial institutions and your experience during this pandemic, because we know that restaurants were gravely impacted. And another loaded piece here is, how can the systems, because, we really want to talk about how we can improve the systems that support small business owners. How can these systems better serve businesses of color? Perhaps as public and private sectors, to help them better understand. Jeannie?
Absolutely, Felicia. And like Tawanda say, for us, understand that we are not alone, right? We are not the only restaurant that's going through this trouble of not applying, all that stuff, right? I'll share with you, Felicia, it was very frustrating, the first round of PPP. And again, it's no fault. Everyone's just kind of reacting, right? By giving credit to the SBA and our government, is that they heard it loud and clear. Is frustrating, and the second round of PPP is actually easier. But how do we get to our local community grassroots folks? I'll tell you, sometimes, when I got my PPP, I was excited, but I pick up the phone, call 20 of my friends and family who owns restaurant and say, hey, did you get yours? If not, why not? Let me show you who I went through, what I did. And it just went viral, right? In fact, I was just talking to somebody yesterday about who's a sole proprietor. They're like, no, I don't have payroll. I don't qualify for that. I'm like, well, do you have Schedule C? They're like, yes. And I say, well, you do qualify, right? So a lot of folks don't know that they themselves eliminated themselves out of this process, right? So my advice to everyone is, if you don't know the answer, go find it. And if you don't know, call somebody. If one person doesn't know it, call another person. Use your network and connect. And out of this today, I'll tell you, I'm going to be calling Kim after this conference, right? To say, hey, Kim, I want to know, how did you do it, right? Because I want to be like you. Right. So I think if you can just walk away from this 2-hour webinar, just pick a couple of contacts here and follow up and learn. I think that's one great thing to walk away with.
Great. So Kim, I'm going to ask you as a build on to that, from a systemic perspective, what could the public and private sectors have done better to serve small businesses, to really kind of help them shore up the finances needed?
Well, one of the what I call critical components, which is endemic of these institutions, is none of them are really small businesses. They may work for these institutions, but no one knows what Tawanda, Jaime, and Jane Lee and I do every day as a small business owner. And I'm always amazed when I see classes, whether it's USC or UCLA or Stanford, where they have these programs where they are talking about entrepreneurship. No one knows what it's like to be a parent unless you're a parent. No one knows what it's like to be an entrepreneur unless you live and breathe being an entrepreneur. So part of it is actually having people like us in those programs, or seeking some of our feedback of what needs to be done. Because at the end of the day, no one can teach you how to be an entrepreneur. You have to have tools in your toolkit. Aside from the drive, I always tell people understanding a balance sheet, an income statement, cash flow analysis, projections, Now, I tell people all the time, having a business plan is your roadmap to success. And having that business plan as a fluid component, because at the end of the day, you need to learn to pivot. Because guess what? Crisis comes up. And if you're not prepared for that crisis, there's a dilemma. And I always tell people, I learned from one of my clients, preparation, preparation, preparation. And if you're not prepared, there will be a problem. I like to add what Jay Lee said. It's funny because when we first were on a prep call last week, one of the first things I did, because I love you very much, Jay Lee, and I love your restaurant. I went to your website. What I did, I had some friends in Las Vegas. I sent an email to them and I said, I met this entrepreneur who runs this very successful restaurant. Please go and patronize her. Part of that is if we don't help each other and pull each other up, who will?
Right. And so so what I think I hear is two things. It's lean on one another. But I also think what I heard critically, which I hope we explore more in our later panel, is really making sure that the small business is included in these decision making. I often hear that sometimes that government doesn't understand small business. And so it's ensuring that the voice of the user is there. And so Jaime, I want to get you into this particular question around, from where you sit, where can our systems be better? Just based on your experience.
If I go back to my airplane story, you cannot engineer parts for an airplane if you don't know the mechanics of the airplane. Anybody can make parts, even a machine. But like Kim was saying, if you don't run a business, you don't know a business. Okay. I'm not criticizing anybody or putting anybody down, but it's critical that if you're going to make parts for an airplane, you better know. Because that can be dangerous, very dangerous. So this situation is the same thing. I mean, we might put an airplane, but I mean, we got people making decisions that, again, not criticizing, that they don't know anything about. Simple as that, and that's the real world.
Great. You shared that sentiment nicely. So we know that, there are a lot of organizations, and this is a great opportunity to talk about, who is creating and working on behalf of small businesses. And so there are a lot of organizations and programs working to create what we call ecosystems, wraparound services that really support the success of a small business owner as a whole. And so Kim, talk to us about how they're doing with that. Like, what else really needs to happen? I know you shared that the voice of the entrepreneur needs to be present, but what else is there that needs to happen, Kim?
Well, I think aside from those ecosystems that you referenced, Felicia, I wanted to dovetail what was said earlier about what we as entrepreneurs or small business owners need to do. One of your key components, aside from having a mentor and a sponsor, which I'm 100% supportive of, also having a very good lawyer and having a very good CPA. I always tell people, as a CEO for the last 30 years of my career, the most important person to my enterprises, and as you know, I'm running 3 separate small businesses, is my CFO, because he has a good understanding of forecasting. And when we get in a room, or now virtually get on Zoom, we talk about what needs to be done, not just for today, but 3 months down the road, 4 months down the road. So those ecosystems are not just those institutions that we talked about and referenced earlier. It's all about our institutions. My CFO, my lawyer are very, very critical for whatever I do, and do a check-in. And I will tell you, having a good understanding of the local institutions, whether it's the city, in my case, I'm headquartered in Los Angeles, the city of Los Angeles, the county of Los Angeles, and the state of California. All 3 of those entities have small businesses as a reference. Your local chambers are an excellent source. The SBA are excellent sources. But at the end of the day, having all of those ecosystems at your beck and call or at your availability is a good resource. But small businesses or just business people should not be dependent on those, but having them as resources. At the end of the day, I would rather talk to a Jay Lee, a Jaime, and a Tawanda before I talk to any of them. Why? Because they live and breathe and they know my pain, because it's a 24/7. It is not you clock in and you clock out. Because when people come to me, Felicia, and say, Kim, I'm thinking about starting a business, I will guarantee Jaime, Tawanda, and Jane Lee did not go through the process of asking someone permission. We made a decision. We were going to start a business, and we did it.
Great. So Tawanda, I know that in an interview that we held together, that you actually work with women-owned businesses to help them launch, pivot, swivel, as you is one of your words, and so talk to us about ecosystems and programs that are in place to help just the very audience that you serve, particularly those who are just getting started. And I love that Kim has basically said, equip yourself with, educate yourself, understand what it takes to start a small business. But we also know that there are lots of organizations out there that are tasked with just doing that. So what do you say to these systems in place, Tawanda?
Well, I would state that there are, being in the industry that I'm in, which is the industry of supplier diversity, helping minority and women businesses gain access to public, government, and private sector contracting, my network affords me the ability to tap into these systems, such as the Small Business Development Center, the Women Business Development Center. You have SCORE, you have the National Independent Business Owners, you have various chambers, ethnic and gender-based chambers, if that makes you feel more comfortable. And also, you don't forget your Department of Chamber of Commerce's, because they work in opportunity zones to help storefront businesses and things of that nature. So there are a lot of ecosystems, but what I would echo that Kim stated is that your arsenal needs to be stacked. You want your arsenal to be full before you need it. You don't want to wait until you need a resource to tap into it. You want it to already be on tap for you when you need it. So there are organizations like AARP and other organizations like Amazon, Google, Facebook. All of them have, guess what, small business programs, and specifically Black and Brown programs. So we want to tap into those organizations. And if you're in a specific industry, I would say, Felicia, there are specific ones. There are Black women in technology. There are Black women in construction. I mean, there's so many organizations out there. You just got to get your right mix, stack your arsenal. So when the chips are down, if you're going down, you're going to go down fighting, because you have a whole army behind you to support you.
And how would you rate those, Tawanda?
How would I rate them?
Yes.
Oh, I think that standalone, they are awesome. But we need more than just standalone. We need them to all connect the pieces and connect the dots for minority and women businesses and Black and Brown businesses. Meet them where they are, in their neighborhoods, in their communities, and help them connect the dots. Because it's easy to fish in a pond, but when we want them to play in the ocean, so we got to help them navigate into that ocean and be able to play well and thrive.
Great. And so, Jan E., before I go to our closing question, how would you rate them in these ecosystems designed to support our small businesses?
Like I said before, as you can probably tell, Felicia, we all are owners, right? Because we are entrepreneurs. We don't take the victim mentality. We don't go and say, oh my God, and we're entitled to all this stuff. No, we're not, right? We live in this wonderful country of United States of America. And I'll tell you, it is fabulous. It's awesome. And as a woman, a minority woman, I can actually own businesses. That's amazing, right? So what I would just leave it is that the resources out there, and that we need to, if you don't know the answers, go find somebody else. Use us, right, as a resource. So all 500 of you that were on it before, some have dropped, right? I mean, applaud yourself, congratulate yourself for taking the time to learn about the resources that are out there. But for those who haven't joined in, because I know there are a lot of entrepreneurs actually working right now, right? So hopefully they will tune in, they will rewatch this, during midnight after the hours, and pick something good out of it. So, but I would say, Felicia, information's out there. I'm blessed, and I think we're all blessed here, but you know what, it's a good thing.
Good.
That's all I want to say.
Great, great. So, as we close, I'm going to ask all of you to really think about, we know that following our conversation, we're going to be talking to advocates, policymakers, individuals who are really working on behalf of small businesses to really ensure that they strive and thrive. And so what do you, from your perspective, think that policymakers and those working on behalf or making policies on behalf of small businesses, what is it that you think that they don't get? Because we've talked about the onus of the small business owner, but we know that there are systems in place that are really that are needed to help gird up the success of small businesses. So what is it that they need to know that you haven't conveyed here in our time today? And we'll start with you, Jenny.
Sure. I think, you know what, speak up, right? Because I know right now there's a lot of AAPI hate crimes out there right now. I know our Asian American Pacific Islanders were normally very quiet, don't say anything, but speak up, right? Participate in roundtables, participate in media, but bring solutions. That's what I say. Don't just whine, but come up with solutions and participate in conversations. And Felicia, I'm personally involved. I'm talking to my SBA folks all the time saying, hey, did you know you could do this better? Or let me help you, So I think I am holding myself accountable to speak up. So I encourage all our, brothers and sisters, minorities to speak up.
Kim, what do you think that policymakers and advocates need to understand about small businesses?
Well, one, I say take a survey, come talk to us, ask us, give us incentives to participate, because walking away from our businesses, for us, it's a 24/7. I tell people it does not stop if I'm on vacation. I'm still connected. At the end of the day, ask us, what are the needs of the small business? Where are the gaps? What's working? What's not working? How can we enhance what we're doing? It's just simple of us asking each other. They need to ask us.
Perfect. Jaime?
I totally agree with that. I mean, we have to educate them on what we do and take the time, like Jane said, we have to go to meetings and get involved. And I'll give you a quick example. 30 years ago, if I spoke to somebody about life insurance from my country, they almost shoot me. Now, 30 years later, I'm not saying I educated myself, but yes, the fact that you mentioned and what's the need, why do they need it? And then they can ask us, what do we need? And how do we need it? Because what I understand is small businesses is the motor of this country. So I think they should invest a little bit of time and effort.
And Tawanda, what say you?
I would state that first and foremost, policymakers, we need to deal with the underlying issue that will continue to follow us until we address it. And that is that we have a discriminatory economic system that needs to be more inclusive. In fact, our culture from a country needs to be more inclusive. So let me just say that enabling policies without enabling resources lead to empty coffers for small businesses, particularly Black and brown businesses, and creating policies in vacuums and silos that are not connected, where you're not going to the people who are living this every day and getting their ideas. You are missing the mark. This opportunity right now is giving us the time to get on track, to reset, restart, and reinvigorate small businesses, particularly minority and women businesses in our country, which we are built upon.
Great. Woo! Well, I hope you all have enjoyed this panel as much as I have. I hope you all have learned something from those who are engaged each and every day, as I have. And so I just want to thank you. When I reached out to each of you to ask you to be on this panel, you didn't hesitate. So I thank you for all your insights today. And I greatly enjoyed hearing what it's like on the ground and really hearing from where you sit, what else needs to happen and where those shifts need to be made. And I know that the other business owners who are with us today can absolutely relate. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And so now I'm going to hand this off back to Rhett, who is going to tee us up for our next panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Felicia. And I want to thank you all as well, because one of the things you said that was really important in that panel was a lot of people can't be here with us today because they're running their businesses. We're obviously thrilled to have hundreds of folks on the line today, but I know each of you took time away from your businesses to be with us, and we are grateful. And Tawanda, we've got to bring you back, because I was just like, you were bringing it forward for me and I was here for it. And so future ways to plug you in for sure. With that, let's continue the conversation. We have another amazing panel. We've been so fortunate to continue our conversation really about how we build equity in this amazing community. And so with that, it's my pleasure to turn the conversation over to Jean Axius, who's the Senior Vice President for Global Thought Leadership at AARP, and really has been an amazing advocate for equity and inclusion across the AARP platform and organization, also working on building partnerships, unique partnerships with private sector actors, not only in our country, but across the globe to promote longevity and equity. So with that, Jean, thanks so much for being here, and I'll kick it over to you.
Well, thank you so much, Rhett, and good afternoon, everyone, and good morning, depending on where you are. That was such an amazing panel that just preceded us. Thank you so much, Felicia. I am thrilled to be moderating a distinguished panel with some amazing thought leaders and experts to really think about what are the solutions to really build equity into our entrepreneurship community population, particularly for those over the age of 50. As Felicia and Susan and others have talked about earlier throughout our session today, a focus on equity is critically important for AARP, really addressing the issues of both health and wealth and the intersections to ensure that people can live a stronger, more productive life. As we think about entrepreneurship, it is critical as a pathway for addressing many of the wealth gaps that we actually see. And I think that this panel and this conversation that we've had today is really elevating some solutions, some insights in terms of exactly how we move forward. I am extremely honored to be able to welcome to the main stage Julissa Collialo, who's the co-founder of the Maestro Entrepreneur Center, where she works and collaborates with multiple stakeholders to foster economic growth in the poorest zip codes of San Antonio, Texas. She also served as the co-lead of the mayor's economic transition team during COVID-19 to help local businesses impacted by the pandemic. Joining Julissa is Mark Madrid. Mark is the Associate Administrator for the Office of Entrepreneurial Development at the Small Business Administration. He serves as the Executive Director for the Latino Business Action Network, where he works to expand Latino research and education impact programs at Stanford University, which is one of my alma maters. We also have Chris Wheat, who's joining us today. Chris is the co-president at JP Morgan Chase Institute. He previously taught as an assistant professor at MIT Solon School of Management and the Center for Urban Entrepreneurship and Economic Development at Rutgers Business School. And then finally, we have Mark Morial, who serves as the president and CEO of the National Urban League since 2003, where he has created a framework in terms of generation policies that support community color, including, as I refer to, the entrepreneur centers in 5 cities to help the growth of small businesses. From 1994 to 2002, Mark served as the mayor of New Orleans, where he leveraged a broad multiracial coalition and just did amazing innovative programs and policies. Welcome, everyone. How's everybody doing today? It is so, thank you. It's so good to see all of you. I'm going to just start off just kind of picking up where we left off with the previous panel. I thought it was extremely powerful what Tawanda said in terms of this is an opportunity to reset, to reimagine, to rebuild. And when we look back over the last year, and as we think about the devastating impact of the pandemic, particularly on minority-owned firms, women-owned firms, what have been some of the lessons you've learned? How do you think we got here in terms of some of the disproportionate impacts on this population as the report from the New York Feds and AARP showed? And how do you think we might move forward? So I'm going to start with you, Julissa, if you don't mind, just kind of letting us know, what are some of the key lessons you learned from this pandemic, particularly as it relates to the impact on the pandemic and the impact on small businesses? how did we get here? And more importantly, how can we move forward?
Thank you, Jean, for having me. I think what was interesting to me was the panel right before this, right? You had the business owners speaking on the experiences and the challenges. And that is the reason why we need to continue having these conversations, right? The reason we're here today, when the pandemic hit, we immediately saw that the issues with equity were being magnified. Immediately, they were the biggest obstacles or the biggest at-risk companies, right? They were the ones, 50% were going to go out of business in 5 years before pandemic. During pandemic, 5 months. It was going to go quick, right? And so having the fact that the level playing field is not a level playing field for small business. Small business are considered high risk. They pay highest interest, they pay highest insurance rate, they pay highest on materials, they pay highest on everything, right? So having any type of programs that are going to help them reduce that so that they do have some kind of advantage is so needed. But most of the time, that has never been the trends. If you look at 10 years ago, it wasn't there. You look at 10 years prior to that, it wasn't there. You look at the issue nationwide, it's exactly the same. The small businesses are not growing because there's way too many barriers keeping them from growing. And so this conversation is about equity. We should be talking about what are the things we need to change to make sure that we're addressing one at a time, right? And business owners, just like they said in the panel earlier, I think Kim Hunter said it, they are going to lift each other up because they want to be successful and they want their neighbors to be successful. They are in business because they care about their neighborhoods, they care about the people they hire, and they're going to do everything and anything to get there. They just need someone to open the doors and let them in without saying, you can only come in if you have these things. That's where we go wrong.
And Mark Morrell, you're president and CEO of the National Urban League. Can you say a little bit more in terms of exactly what have been some of the lessons learned and what are some of the insights that you're looking forward to as an organization to really kind of helping to lead us moving forward?
Let me first of all just say thank you for the conversation and for the focus and for the great panelists who I think offering so many great suggestions. We've learned over the last 15 years since the National Urban League made a big move to support small businesses with now 12 entrepreneurship centers serving some 13 to 14,000 small businesses. 90% of them are African American owned and some 50 to 55% are women owned. That it gets down to number one, capital. Number two, connections. Number three, contracts. Number four, customers. And I put capital first because in being a former entrepreneur and in witnessing the entrepreneurs that we serve, you're never going to find more energy, more desire, more scrappiness, more intuition, more, if you will, just basic human talent. Entrepreneurship requires passion. And what we've learned is that that passion has not been matched by the marketplace of America, the financial marketplace of America, with access to both equity and debt. And so many small business owners, of course, 90% of Black small business owners are the chief cook, bottle washer, CFO, building director, custodian, all wrapped in one, has not been matched. And statistics show that these small businesses are growing at a faster clip than many of the larger businesses in the country, looking at it on a percentage basis. And that in Black America, in Latinx America, in Asian America, in, if you will, among women, the desire for self-employment and entrepreneurship is high. It's strong. And America must understand that to invest in our small businesses is to promote economic growth. Now, I'm excited that the Biden administration, I think, has taken up this mantle. Some of the changes they made to the flawed PPP program are most noted. Some of the new resources included and new initiatives included in the American Rescue Plan, I think, are also important down payments, if you will. And I think there will be even a greater opportunity for the Biden administration and this Congress to lead the way with a passage of an infrastructure and jobs bill that addresses many of the things that we're talking about, addresses access to capital, a commitment and an insurance that African-American owned businesses and small businesses have an opportunity to participate in any growth strategy, any growth formula. So we've learned a great deal. And I learned, and that's my final thought. When I served as mayor of New Orleans, had a very aggressive program. We called it our Emerging Business Program. And it was focused on African-American and women-owned firms. And we were insistent on using both our leverage and our procurement power to make a difference. And we created a tremendous amount of wealth. We created a lot of opportunity by doing that. It was not always warmly received by everyone, but I had a conviction, and the people of New Orleans at the time wanted change. And so there is a private sector role here. There is a public sector role here. There is a role that small business owners have to meet the moment themselves. And we should not get into a finger pointing conversation ever about whose responsibility it is. It's everyone's responsibility, because to grow small businesses is to produce jobs and economic growth for everyone.
Thank you so much. Mark Madrid, would love to get your thoughts. Building off Mark and also Felicia.
Sure. Great afternoon, everyone. First of all, it has to start with thank you. Thank you to all the entrepreneurs that are out there for your time today. I hope you can hear it from my heart. You have choices with your precious time during the pandemic and recovery. So thank you for your precious time here. Of course, I have a lot of thank yous, and I'll do those later for those who made this happen in the first place. I want to say that, first of all, wow, thank you for, if you have an event that's focused on small business owners, you should feature small business owners. So I don't know about you, but I was absolutely just riveted to that panel. Thank you, Hyman, Tawanda, Jane Lee, Kim, for those insights. I want you to know that here at the SBA that we hear you. And I am so excited to be here on behalf of President Biden, Vice President Harris, and our amazing SBA Administrator, Isabel Guzman. I can only speak to you from the heart first, is that your persistence is notable during COVID-19, and it's always powerful to relate to it. And I can share that I do relate to it. I lost my dad to COVID-19, and I almost lost my mother, and my sister was positive. This was back in the summer of 2020, so it was one of those stories that you heard about, and it was tough. The way I can relate to you is my dad was a business owner. He opened up his welding business in the Texas Panhandle that he owned for over 40 years. I wouldn't be here today. I'm pinching myself that I'm working for the people, my ultimate dream, especially for small businesses, but I'm dedicating my work here around the clock to my father and all the entrepreneurs that are out there, and in this case, 45 plus. What I can tell you is that the lessons learned is that these gaps that existed before, which are gaps in terms of access to capital, access to people, access to resources, access to services, access to everything, fill in the blank, including networks, were magnified during this pandemic. And so what do we do about it? Well, this administration is doing something about it when it comes to solutions. And within the first 100 days, when it comes to COVID-19 related resources, you've seen enhancements in the PPP program. You've seen a cap raise in the EIDL loan program. Now, these are all technicalities, but we need to go further in terms of business owners bringing it to your level, being connected on the ground, realizing what's happening to you, that you're making decisions that you don't know what's going to happen the next month. You don't know if you're going to have your payroll around next week. So we have to bring it to you. And we're excited under the American Rescue Plan that we're launching a Navigators program, a pilot. All that means is we got to be connected to the ground. And thank you for your introduction earlier. My former job was at the Latino Business Action Network, where we had that concept. It's now the CEO is Jennifer Garcia, but we had that concept to fight a ground war, meaning that you know every inch of the terrain when it comes to small business owners, not to be speaking at them from the atmosphere, not to understand why they have caution tape on their bathroom, not to be able to understand that they have 10 or 25% capacity inside. To you restaurant owners, relief is on the way with the Restaurant Revitalization Fund and grant opportunity coming through the American Rescue Plan. I hope you can see it in my eyes, in my expressions, in my heart, that we are here to serve you. And we always got to remember that that's our goal at the SBA. So I look forward to this discussion. I'm delighted to be with these panelists, and to see this chatter is just amazing. Keep it going. And I do want to recognize CDFIs. I see that in the chatter. They have been a powering force behind getting some PPP loans into the hands of our small business owners. And so thank you for this opportunity to be with you today.
And thank you so much, Mark, for being able to join us. And our thoughts are with you and your family. Chris.
Thank you. Yeah.
As president of JP.
So, I mean, thank you again. Let me add my thank yous to all the thank yous before, to the participants, to the panelists, particularly panelists before. It's already hard enough to sort of answer your question after my co-panelists thoroughly answer it in every possible way, everything we might have learned through the pandemic. And so I'm going to try to say something, a little bit something here, but in particular after the panelists before, it's really was amazing to kind of hear the perspective and to hear that voice. And I think it's incredibly important. And I don't know what I can add to what's already been said about making sure that we pay attention to that. And also, Mark, you called out the chatter, which has been fabulous. And so my eyes are trying to pay attention to the conversation. And I'm also got my eyes on what people are saying over there in the chat. It's really, really invigorating. So please continue that. I think the only thing I would add to what's already been said is the gaps absolutely were expanded through the pandemic in all the ways that everybody else already mentioned. And I think the only thing I would add to that, and I just thought it was really fascinating, this isn't on our own research so much as it is on the Fed piece that just came out, was to see the gap expanding in particular for the 45 plus entrepreneurs, which was interesting. A really interesting intersection between age and race in particular, right? So we have seen in our research, and many people have seen in other pieces of research, all of the challenges and sort of differential opportunities Black and Brown entrepreneurs face. For older entrepreneurs, one of the tremendous advantages they bring to being an entrepreneur is they have experience. They have had an opportunity to build customer bases, and they've had an opportunity in many cases to build wealth. And these are things that are super important, like having the customers, having the capital that Mark mentioned are what we see as like some of the most important things. And so I am not surprised that the majority of entrepreneurs are 45 plus and the majority of successful entrepreneurs are 45 plus because of all the time and experience that you have to bring to your business. It's really important. And then to see that we lost more of them over the last year or so is just heartbreaking, because like that's where so much of the contribution was coming from. So I think the thing to pay attention to is to make sure that we do everything we can to support 45 plus entrepreneurs, particularly Black and Brown ones, because they were just making such an important contribution. And to see that the way that the pandemic hit those businesses was harder still, I think is just a real miss, right? Especially if we don't do something about it through policy. And so I think that's the main thing I want to focus on in terms of incremental things to what this already robust panel has brought to this conversation.
Well, I appreciate that, Chris. I want to pick up on something that Mark Morrell indicated in his opening remarks. And he basically called it the 4 C's, that you need capital, you need connections, you need contracts, and you need customers. And we also heard from Mark Madrid in terms of the role of the public sector and the role that the Small Business Administration is playing to really bring that much needed relief. And this is a question for everyone on the panel. is this whole idea, as Mark Morrell indicated, is that we all have a responsibility to close these equity gaps. That it's not just one sector alone that can actually solve it. So Chris, I'll start with you. What are the opportunities to close these equity gaps, and how can we work from a multi-sectorial perspective to really address this moment in time?
No, that's a great question. And look, I think there's, it's a hard problem, right? It's like moving capital around is whole sectors dedicate, sort of lots and lots of resources to that. And so I don't want to understate the difficulty in doing that. But I would say, particularly for both the federal government, and you will know that I have a lot of interest in not just the federal government, but also state and local governments, who may have a unique opportunity over the next year to really play more here than they have in the past, by understanding where the needs are greatest, really to focus whatever programs they can do in the capital space to the small businesses that need it the most. I do worry that there are ongoing narratives in aggregate that are about the places that focus on the places where the small business sector has already gotten lots of capital, and it is true that there are many businesses that are having their best year ever, and I celebrate that, right? I'm very happy to see when businesses have been successful, but I just want to make sure, and I think it's important for at least those sectors, and sort of federal and state local governments, to not just hear those stories and support that success, but really to understand how you might target in a very sort of micro-targeted way capital support in particular to the industries, to the personal services businesses that have really, sort of been impacted by a lot of the, stay-at-home homeowners and people just behavioral inclinations to, not go out when there's a pandemic, which I think is an understandable response to those Black and brown entrepreneurs and to those communities where, historically, and I think in the current moment, we see increasing sort of pull away in terms of people going to the businesses and servicing the businesses in those areas. So I think that's the biggest thing that you really sort of lean on would be the targeting and the focus. I think, for whatever resources we can put against it, making sure that it's money well spent would be what I would suggest.
Thank you, Chris. Felicia, thoughts?
I think that one of the things is, how we look at small businesses, right? We have to understand that a small business is going to go through different levels, from startup to emerging to second stage, all the way hopefully getting to large. And as the businesses are going through this transition, is understanding the services that are being offered by the government, by SBA, by any of the CDFIs, where the business is and the needs that they have, because each one is going to have different needs. The second stage is really much the business owner that's already gone through the trials and error. They've gone through the school of hard knocks. They've learned their lessons already, right? They're already establishing themselves in a more thought process, right? The emerging, man, they're just taking off. They're trying to get as much as they can to get their flag out there so people can see them, and they want that repeat client coming in, right? The startup is kind of figuring out what I'm going to sell, what am I good for? And, when they land that first repeat client, that's something that they can easily say, wow, I did it. Okay, now I have a product or service that I can start marketing. And that is something that I think a lot of the times the programs come out and they're one size fits all, and it really doesn't work, right? We saw that during the PPP approach, it didn't work for everybody. And they're like, we have all this money for small business. Well, who took advantage of it? It was the levels that were more established, but having the programs established for the different levels is very important. Having the training available for the different levels is very important. Having the access to capital at those levels is also important. One of the things that we like to talk about at the Maestro Center here in San Antonio is that our ecosystem, we bring it together, we work together. We never say they do this and we do that. We all are good at something, we bring it together and it helps that entrepreneur. But we also have to work with the agencies that are giving out those contracts. We go back and ask them, what do you need to make sure you're giving more contracts to small business? Let us do the training. So let us connect them. Let us do the networking. So that is not separate. It should be something that happens and they're constantly talking. The buy local programs for are, at the city, the state, the federal level. That has to happen across the board, but it cannot happen at 5%. It has to happen at 50% to make an impact, right? And we have to have our government and leadership that support those kind of programs, or it will never happen. And it's one thing to say a private owner is going to say, I'm going to do it. It's one thing to say we're paying public taxes money, and that money is not staying within the same buy local program, and it should. The other thing I think is that when we are talking about programs for small business, have small business at the table, because they're going to tell you what's going to work and what isn't, but you need to have them at different levels. Remember, the other thing is having the agencies that are serving the small businesses already, their boots on the ground. Get them engaged right away. We don't need government to create another department internally to try to funnel this money. That should never happen because they're so disconnected. We need the agencies that are already working, connecting with the businesses to be supported. The incubation centers, the nonprofits that are working with these small businesses need support. We need government to look at them and say, hey, what do you need to serve more businesses? Instead of saying, oh, no, you're not going to do this, we're going to do it separately. And that's a mistake. Those are lessons learned that need to happen. And the reality is that right now, everybody's talking about there's going to be a lot of funding coming in for small businesses. It's going to be limited funds because small businesses need more than that. They need more than a one-time fix. They need support that is established, that stays on with them to continue establishing their businesses. They need loans that are not going to be high interest, right? The CDFIs are there to serve, but they're also should be there to serve with low interest. Even they're coming in at high interest because it's high risk. I mean, give me a break. When are we going to say, hey, we're going to support it because it's the right thing to do and it's going to stay local? Those things need to happen, and we need it to happen now.
Thank you. Mark Morial.
Yeah, let me focus. I want to make 2 points. One, I think it bears noting why the PPP was problematic from the start. And it was problematic from the start because when the Trump administration designed PPP, its aims on the top line were laudable. We're going to create relief for small businesses such that no employees would have to lose their jobs. However, when they designed the program, the definition of a small business was any business with 500 employees or less. They took the SBA size guidelines, which had been respected and honored throughout the country for years and years and years, and tossed them in the garbage can. They didn't use the SBA definition of what a small business is, which, as you know, has definitions which differ from sector to sector in terms of revenues, in terms of the number of employees. That was a failure from the start. The reason why I point this out is because in the design of public policy, there's got to be a conversation with the people that the public policy is designed to impact. Number 2, they said, we are going to exclude the owner-operator businesses from benefiting from this. This is for your employees. It's not for you. Not understanding the data that demonstrated that 8.5 million businesses in America, 4.5 million small, average number of employees for a small business, regardless of race, 5 employees. Black and Latinx businesses, anywhere from 80 to 90% of them, 1 employee. So the people that designed it, frankly, didn't know what they were doing because they didn't talk to anybody. They talked to themselves. They looked at it the way they looked at it. And then they created an incentive for the banks so that the bigger the loan, the bigger the fee, thereby incentivizing the banks to make larger loans versus smaller loans. These are design defects in the policy, in the program. The minute I saw these design defects, I shared with my allies in Congress, mostly Democrats, that this was a defect in the design of the program. Fast forward, the Biden administration, during the transition, worked with a number of us and came out with a number of, if you will, patchwork fixes to try to make PPP a whole lot better. And I give them credit for trying to take the flawed design and do the best they can with it. Now, what would help today? I tell you, one thing that would help the CDFI industry is if the CDFIs could get inexpensive capital. Most CDFIs have to basically borrow money from a bank or financial institution after the bank is marking up, whether it's the source of capital is from their own deposits or whether it's from the Fed. They mark it up and lend it to the CDFI. And then the CDFI is going to mark it up and lend it to its own customers. If we could find a way to get 1% money to the CDFI community, if we could lower the cost of capital for the CDFI community, the perception is that these loans are more risky. The reality is that they're not. Because this is what happens. If you're a big lender, big borrower, and you get in trouble with your loan, what does the bank do? They restructure your loan, flatten out the payments, work with you. They want to avoid the default. They're not interested in calling the loan. If you're a small business lender, you've signed a personal guarantee, you get behind on your payment, bam, you go into collections. And there's really no meaningful effort. That's a cultural change that has to occur. So I point out that we need to, if CDFIs, which we have one at the National Urban League, which we support, which there needs to be much more capacity to lend to small businesses, are going to be a method to address the capital issues, then what we need to do is find reforms, I'll call it, to how CDFIs are funded so that they can get a lower cost of capital and thereby pass on that capital to the people they lend to at a much lower rate. That to me would be a distinct, if you will, step in the right direction. Remember, CDFIs are now 30 years old, 40 years old, almost 50 years old, 40 to the 70s, right? We got to update. We can't use 20th century mentality, a 20th century mindset to solve 21st century problems.
Thank you for that, Mark. Mark Madrid.
Well, thank you, Mark, for your passion, Julissa as well, and Chris with your reflections. And I'd like to bring it back to what we're trying to do right now, considering that we're in this pandemic. And so thank you for your viewpoints, noted. Business owners who are out there are wondering, what can we do right now? So I always like to think about in these virtual settings, because you might be running your independent school district or caring for a loved one or thinking about your employees or when you're going to come back and restore operations at a full capacity. You might be thinking about your vaccine. Help is here. And so I'd like to talk about my office, the Office of Entrepreneurial Development, which oversees the network of small business development centers, women's business centers, and SCORE chapters across the country. There's 62 lead centers for the SBDC, which is a small business development center, and there's over 900 service centers across the country. There's 135 women's business centers and over 10,000 SCORE mentors across the country. So how do you access that? Well, one takeaway, because I think about takeaways in respect to you, like coming out of this deal, what is something that you can have as a deliverable? So thank you, PPS and AARP. I'd like to mention that Small Business Resource Center, because I just don't plug something without going into it, right? If you go to this resource center that was mentioned earlier, you'll see under resources that you can go to the SBA to find one of those service centers that I was just describing. And so I hope that you do that. As well, we are looking very, very hard on making sure that we relay the enhancements that are being made right now. I'll give you one for an example, right? If you're a 40 out there, a Schedule C, a slow, we made PPP more accessible for you. How? Where you're able to leverage a calculation that is not based on gross revenues, but net profit. So that brought a little bit of relief for you all. When we're talking about restaurant owners, a service sector that's been hit incredibly hard, as Jane Lee attested to earlier, help is on the way with that. So I'm going to keep my remarks short and sweet in terms of saying, I want to make sure that you all walk away and go to that website right now. I hope somebody can repost it, that Small Business Resource Center, that you can reference the SBA resources that are on that center so that you can put in your zip code and go to one of those resources that I just mentioned. I'm so proud to lead this area, the Office of Entrepreneurial Development, and all the hard work that is being done every day on the ground. We have more work to do. And so as part of the American Rescue Plan, under my office, we are also launching the Community Navigator pilot. And all that means is we're trying to access those folks that you all mentioned in this panel through proven community advocates that are connected. I come back to being connected to the ground and not the air, meaning you know the terrain. I saw some chatter earlier about Spanish language services and CDFIs. I've heard, which I agree with 100%, the relationships, your accountant, legal support, relationships with the banker or capital provider. So the bottom line is so many businesses do not have those access points. So that's what we're going to try to remedy through the Community Navigator pilot and the other programs that I mentioned here. As well, the shuttered venues is finally getting on the ground and implemented. So a lot of terminology. Our job is to make sure that you understand all the programs that are out there. I'll close with this. When I was back in my former position, I realized very quickly that there is an appetite for small business owners to want to understand, but we had to do a better job of explaining what is the difference between, well, first of all, what is EIDL, economic injury disaster loan? What is the difference between an EIDL loan, which is a low interest loan that's amortized over 30 years with deferred first payment? What is the difference between an EIDL loan and an EIDL grant? What is the difference then with a PPP draw? What are the differences between the Paycheck Protection Program deployed in 2020 and the one deployed in 2021? And then what is the forgiveness? What does that entail? Where are the latest updates? Right there, you have at least 5 resources. It's our job to make sure that we make that digestible, distillable, and encourage you and give you the confidence to act. So that is our commitment, and I'm proud to be here serving you. Thank you.
But thank you so much, Mark, for your leadership and for sharing these resources with everyone who's watching right now. We have about 4 minutes, and I want to wrap up with this last question. And that is, there's no secret that systemic inequities and some of the discriminatory practices are real barriers, particularly for women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses. We saw the data earlier that really showed the devastating impact on minority-owned and women-owned businesses. We've also heard through the research that was released some of the qualitative insights that were shared by people of color who own businesses in terms of some of the barriers that they face. What is the conversation that needs to happen in terms of addressing these systemic issues? And what's the cost of doing nothing? And I'm just going to turn it to Alicia, if you would like to close us out with just your thoughts. What's the cost of doing nothing if we don't address these systemic barriers?
Well, if we're happy with the way things are today, then do nothing. But if we're not happy with the way things are, if we want better communities, if we want to build the economy, we want better jobs, better paying benefits for our community, we want to improve poverty, we got to get to work. We got a lot of work to do. We got to talk about it at all levels of government, not just at the federal, we need it at the state, and we need it at the local level, and we need to get involved. I think some of the business owners were saying, hey, they were getting involved, and they're letting the government know, even the services being offered, hey, this doesn't work, but if you do this, this would work. those are the things that need to happen. And you need to provide the services that are coming even from, some of the agencies. They cannot be so one size fits all. They got to be flexible because they need to be able to be adjusted at the level that they're being served. And if you can develop through the SBA a program that is tied to mentorship, but that is tied to not a 2-year program, get business owners to volunteer and just give back and give some time to serve and help each other, they will create that networking that needs to happen, right? We just need the gateway to produce it. But to do nothing, that's not even an option we should say is an option. We can't do that.
Chris?
Yeah, it could be the same or it could just be worse. I mean, if you like the way things are now, you might still want to do something, because if you don't do anything, I think, the bigger, better resources, businesses are going to continue to sort of leverage those resources to build their advantage, right? So I think doing nothing is probably worse than sort of leaving things as they are, which is not a great place to start from. I completely agree with you, Julius, on that point, but I would just say it could be yet worse than that, and that's what I would pay attention to.
Mark Morrell, sir. You're on mute, sir.
Our world has been rocked as we sit here out of the corner of my eye and watch the trial in Minneapolis. Our world has been rocked as we've seen hatred directed at our Asian American brothers and sisters. Our world has been rocked by watching the events on January 6th at the US Capitol. The status quo is not an option for the nation. The status quo, when it comes to economic empowerment, the wealth gap, the income gap, the racial wealth gap, and the gap between large and small businesses and businesses of color and others, have to be closed. It's an imperative of our times. To ignore it, to embrace the status quo, and to be afraid of change is simply to usher in more conflict, more division, wider gaps, and more challenges for this country. It is simple. This all ties back to what kind of nation we want to build in the 21st century in America for all. America with true economic opportunity. We can't just mouth the words. We can't just talk the talk. We have to walk the walk.
Thank you, Mark. And I know that we're pressed for time. So Mark Madrid, you have the final word, sir.
Thank you. Thank you to the panelists. I mean, the passion that you spoke, with which you spoke is, wow. I mean, it's coming from a deep place of wisdom. I'd like to bring it back to where I started, which is with my dad. My dad was still 2 weeks before he got back into the hospital where he went for the final time. At 76, was operating a Bobcat at our family ranch, and was selling pipe on Facebook. Now, when he left this earth, the things that we're talking about here, I wish he would have had more access to capital, more access to resources, more access to networks, low interest rate loans, preserved credit score. What might have been? What might have been is he would have been able to have franchises, and this family business could be still surviving. And not only that, but persisting through COVID-19. I'm excited, as President Biden says, to deliver solutions and not create division. And this forum here, to all of you, and I heard about the Native American community here too as well. That's very important to this conversation as well. But we're talking 45 plus, socially and economically disadvantaged. We're talking BIPOCs, our sensitivities to the Asian business community as well during this time period. We're talking about the LGBTQ community. All of us together, and rural business owners, and for that matter, white business owners who have been disadvantaged in underserved territories. It's time for us to think about our commonality, and there's a mantra that we had at the Latino Business Action Network, where I previously served. Do business with each other, get business for each other, and promote each other. And so with all that too, what they've started to do, and I see you doing it here, and what these folks said here, my dear friends, is rise up. We're at an inflection point, and it's the right atmosphere to rise up and make your voices be known. With that said, I'm just very thankful to AARP, PPS, and all the panelists and presenters today. And a special shout out to Felicia. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you. And now I'm going to turn it to Rhett to close us out. Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much. Let me add my thanks. And we're running now just a few behind. So we're going to go right into wrapping up the event, but stay for the final moment. We're going to wrap up some resources and make sure everyone has anything for what's been an incredible few hours. Now it's my pleasure to turn the conversation over to David Erickson, who's the Senior Vice President and Head of Outreach at the New York Fed, and Jean Sutsvin, who leads programs as the Senior Vice President at AARP. David, take it away.
Thanks, Fred. And thanks to everybody. Wow, that chat session, I could just watch that for hours. That was just so amazing. But I have to admit, I miss us being together. I miss us being. I particularly love I'm here in New York City, and our headquarters is beautiful giant building on basically on Wall Street here. And you know what I like to remind people when they're in this pretty grand, overwhelming building at some point is that you own this building. This is your building, and I say that in part because I want to invite you into sort of the work that we do. You know, of course, John Williams mentioned the many emergency efforts that the Fed engaged in during the worst of the recession. But we also have the ability to do research, to shine a light on areas where there's a need. We tried to live the old Quaker adage of speaking truth to power. And we also have a role to convene important conversations, to bring people together, to learn and search for solutions. So we're always eager to do that, especially when we have an opportunity to do that research and convening with an amazing partner like AARP. Now, you know, running a business is important. As we saw from the chat, I mean, the number of cities, I was trying to keep a list of the cities there for a while, but it was too long. You touch every part of the country, but as a whole, you do something even more. Over the past decade, roughly 32 million small businesses in the US created more than 10 million net new jobs. That's basically 2/3 of overall net new job creation. But more than even that, small businesses are contributing something even more important, which is hope in communities. And I work in community development. I know how important small businesses are to low-income communities. And I agree with Father Boyle, the founder of Homeboy Industries, a small business incubator in Los Angeles, who says the best way to stop a bullet is with a job. So looking forward, we need to find ways to make small businesses more resilient. Even in good times, they struggled. And so here are some opportunities we think might be worth pursuing. Data suggests building that bridge building between business owned by people of color and community banks helps both. We can harness the promise of fintech by learning what it does best, enable capital to move quickly to those who need it. Lenders that got emergency SBA authorization can still make loans. Those include fintechs, community development financial institutions, and minority depository institutions. So to find one in your area, please visit the SBA's PPP website. We heard many times today that we must make it easier to ask for help and expand networks. In one of our many listening sessions during the pandemic, we heard from African-American business owners who said that it's more than a lack of access to capital. There's always a lack of access to partners, coaching and mentoring, and other resources that are essential for success. Businesses need more than just capital. How do we build those ecosystems that support success? That was a big theme today. I loved all the terms about pivot, swivel, prepare for a crisis, help business rethink their business model. That's something that we can help them with too. And then, of course, Mark sort of threw down the gauntlet there at the end. How can we step away from 20th century mindsets to solve 21st century problems? It's a bigger question. All of these conversations really rest within that larger entity. Within that larger context that we really wrestle with. So I'm just thrilled that you were able to join us today. Wherever you are near a Federal Reserve Bank or a branch. So I would really urge you to reach out to see if you can help convene a conversation in your community to help connect the dots, as Tawanda told us. Thanks for joining us today. And now I'll pass the mic along to Jean.
Thanks so much, David. Thank you again for joining us. And I just want to reflect on, I think, what I heard throughout the last couple of hours. I hope everybody's walking away, taking the research as well as the conversation today, confirming that experienced entrepreneurs, where I think most of you on the call today are, definitely dominates the small business sector. You bring your years of experience, you bring your personal wealth, you bring your ability to solve problems under pressure, your extensive network, and normally, under most times, that is a recipe for success. But as we learned from this research, with the onset of COVID, the number of active firms, particularly those owned by all of you who are over the age of 45, is down 9%. And it's even more felt in the testimonials we heard today, the research that we saw, and that downward pressure is even more felt, unfortunately, in communities of color. So we know that the economy sort of can't reopen until we really do address this health crisis that we're under. So we know that that's task number one. But as David alluded to, as many of you talked about today too, we need to get assistance to all of you. Simply, efficiently, like David mentioned, fintech and other ways, the systems that need to be built in addition to the policy. So we really do hope that small businesses really are vocalizing your needs, your concerns, so that this ecosystem, this design can be best built for you. And we need to really listen to you, listen to ways that we can actually reach out to you most efficiently. One of the things that I'm also moved by too is beyond the financing, beyond the normal tools that you normally access, from plans to marketing, the need for, again, upskilling, reskilling. We hear a lot about that in the future of work. I think it's also very much necessary within the small businesses. So I'm really heartened and encouraged by the work of the New York Fed and the research that we did collectively. I think there's a lot of great focus from our partnership with them. And last but not least, I just have to say, you know, the reason why, again, AARP is in this, just to kind of reiterate some of the points that Nancy Lamont raised earlier. Again, roughly a third of our members are working today. Many of you will want to continue to work either for yourselves or for other people. And we want to make sure that you have access to the sort of desired path that you have. So with that, we're so delighted to have this time with you today, delighted with this partnership with the New York Fed, delighted to also work with public-private strategies. And with that, I'm going to actually bring Rhett back, who's going to share with you a lot more resources that you can access.
Awesome. Well, thank you, David and Jean, and thank you both for your leadership. We are at 4:30 on the dot. We are on time, and I just want to thank all of you. This has been one of the most active chats. We've had hundreds of folks stay with us for close to 3 hours, which is amazing. So thank you for making time in the Zoom room today. Just quickly wanted to highlight some important resources. You've heard a lot about our Small Business Resource Center. You can visit it at smallbizrc.org. The Fed has an amazing set of small business research and events ongoing. You can check out fedsmallbusiness.org. If you want more information about how to start a business, we've included that here. And then, of course, we've included some information about the SBA, and you heard from Mark today and his new position in the Biden administration and the things he's going to do. We said at the start of this program, this was the start of a conversation. This has been a partnership to further and deeper understand. We're proud of the research we've put out today, but I think we were energized by this conversation, having so many leaders, partners, actors, institutions, but mostly with the ability to be able to share it with all of you. So I want to add my thanks. I want to let everyone know that we will follow up and make sure that everyone gets a copy of this conversation today and all the resources that we've talked about. And we'll make sure to find a way that everyone who's joined us today who wants to be able to follow up can do so as well. With that, thank you all so much. Be safe, be well, be prosperous. Thanks for joining us today. We'll see you soon.